as someone who's dealing with me, you have to take all of these things constantly into account. And by me just showing you my label, that's all I have to do. If that's the case, you're going to have a real problem, because at that point in time, you're absolving yourself of all responsibility, and you're putting all responsibility on how someone relates to you by simply showing up with your ingredients label. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Remind podcast. My name's David Masterton, and I'm joined by the wonderful Dr. Ashleigh Moreland. And today we are getting rid of our label makers. We're putting them down. I mean, it's great for organizing in the pantry, but for today's episode, we're just going to unlabel things. Yeah. So it's a big one, Ash. And I think we're going to be covering things sort of just general labels in general labels in general. Who would have thought? That it could be astrology. It could be like personality traits, like the Myers-Briggs. It could be attachment styles. The list goes on and on.
Yeah, now, diagnostic labels.
Diagnoses. Now, I think at the top of the show, I want to put this out there. We're not saying these are bad things. What we're going to be talking about and exploring is the difference between using them as a tool to help you do something versus it being who you are, and potentially to the point of, well, I'm this way, so the world has to put up with it. But anyway, that's a very long intro. Ash, how are you?
I'm great. I'm really excited to talk about this because I have a fairly strong opinion on it, and it's even just come up with clients this week. So I'm really intrigued by the growing use of personality tests. And, I'm doing more and more work with organizations and businesses now, and even the use of personality testing in businesses. I know the disc profiling is really common now. And I find it so fascinating because there's a huge link missing for me. And the link that's missing is that all of these profiling and all of these tests and all of these labels are only descriptors of where we're at this point in time. It's a description of the way that we are, our tendencies towards things. But we are the way that we are because of a whole heap of factors. And also we can change, we can learn, we can grow. And that's the biggest factor of the work that I'm doing with people. And so on the one hand, I see the real benefit in profiling. I see the benefit, how validating and empowering it can be for someone to have a greater understanding of the way that they are, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. And, even I see a lot in diagnostic labels, people feeling very validated by that. And if that's you, I'm so happy for you. I'm so happy that your experience has been one of validation and feeling like you understand yourself better. And I think that's a good thing. Where the risk is for me is when we take that as fact and we have a very fixed mindset around it. And we say, well, that's just how I am. So as you said, Dave, I think that's just how I am. So deal with it, kind of thing. So how do we walk this tightrope of using a tool and having that tool support us in our own growth and development journey versus using this as a tool to justify our weaknesses and justify our shitty behaviors and justify the not so positive things? It's sort of like I'm an Aries, and if I go bossy, people be like, oh, it's because I'm an Aries. Well, yeah,
they're,
but that's not a license to be a bitch.
that's right. But they're not wrong. I mean, Aries are, warriors,
I
campaigners,
get that. I
you
get it.
know, um,
It's not
and
saying that there's not some accuracy in these things, but it's about saying, okay, well, you know what? Yeah, Myers-Briggs. Myers-Briggs is really highly rated, right? And a lot of people rave about it, and absolutely is an accurate. You read that explanation of your personality profile and go, oh my gosh, you know me.
Absolutely.
But I am only me, and I am only this way because of my own past experiences. And we've done whole episodes on this stuff, like why I
Absolutely.
am the way that I am.
That's it. And again, I think even if we go all the way back to that episode, when we were sort of talking about it, these are sort of descriptors that they don't make up who we are. So a bit like yourself, I'm an Aries and I love astrology. And but it doesn't mean, so like for argument's sake, let's put some labels on David. Let's just play a little David labeling game. So firstly, my name is David. I'm a male. I'm an Aries. And for those of you in astrology, that Aries is my sun, Sagittarius is my ascending, which is another fire sign, and my moon is Capricorn, right? So I'm double fire. When it comes to my attachment style in a relationship, I'm an anxious attachment, and I've got ADHD. So we've got quite a few labels here, right? And I did do the Myers-Briggs, and I can't remember exactly what my result was, but I think I was like a diplomat. Anyway, it was like an IN something. So all of these things doesn't mean, okay, so Aries, as passionate as we are, Ashleigh, we are also very temperamental. We can get very passionate about something and drop it 5 seconds later if we're typical
Speak
Aries.
for yourself.
So we need to check your moon and ascending and your other placements. And for my attachment style, being an anxious attachment, I have to constantly know what's going on in a relationship to kind of feel okay. And again, when we're talking about attachment styles, it's where you sort of default in a wounded state. It doesn't. So if that's the case, if I have all these labels, I'm ADHD, I'm an Aries, and I have an anxious attachment style, how does that change the way I expect people to treat me versus how does that change what opportunities I have to understand myself better? And for me, that's where I use all of this. Because yes, you are going to get that recognition of, oh, shit, it's not like I'm just a freak or I'm just by myself in this sort of understanding. If someone else is writing this or if I'm reading this, it means I'm at least one of two people. Great, I'm not alone. And so, pardon me. And when it comes to having connection with people, you might be able to find connection over different personality traits. So again, you go onto dating apps and all of those type of things. One thing you will see is star sign. Why do they put it in there? Oh, okay, because we're supposed to be compatible.
That's compatible with that.
And so it's a tool to sort of start to go, okay, Aries with an Aries, it's going to be one hell of a 5-minute flare up, and then that's going to be about it. Or it could be, fire and air and water and earth and all of those type of things. It doesn't mean you sit there and go, well, because I am David, Aries, attachment style, ADHD, anxious, that as someone who's dealing with me, you have to take all of these things constantly into account. And by me just showing you my label, that's all I have to do. If that's the case, you're going to have a real problem. Because at that point in time, you're absolving yourself of all responsibility and you're putting all responsibility on how someone relates to you by simply showing up with your ingredients label of how David was made up.
And
And that's the
that is the
danger.
fixed mindset, isn't it? That's the
Yep.
fixed mindset, because in a recipe you go, well, there's 1 cup of this and half a cup of that and a teaspoon of that and a tablespoon of that, and that's how you cook this. But
Absolutely.
this is kind of recognizing that, well, yeah, okay, cool. The thing is, our identity is not fixed. We're a fluid canvas that's always adapting and always changing. We can learn, we can grow. Who I was today is not who I was last year. Who I was last year is not the Ash I was when I was 19. And who I was when I was 19 was not the Ash that I was when I was 15 and still living at home. And so my personality and aspects of my sense of self have really shifted and changed as I have learned and grown. And nothing has shifted more than when I went into the trauma healing journey and understanding why I was the way that I was, and looking at developmental stuff and intergenerational trauma and all that kind of stuff. That really opened doors for me. And the personality tests, if I were to do a personality test today, I would get very different results compared to the personality test results that I did really early in my uni days, for instance. And so I used to run a subject at uni. It was a university-wide elective, and we would have a whole entire topic on this, and I'd get everyone to do their personality tests, and then we would have discussions around what resonated for them and what didn't, and whether or not they thought it could change. And under what circumstances did they think it would change? And it was always really eye-opening for people. And the other thing for me is it really points towards how desperate we are as humans to be understood, to be seen, to be heard. Because how massive is it when we are so deprived of being so seen and understood and heard that we need a description from a personality test in order to access that? That in other areas of our lives, we are not seen, we're not understood, we're not valued, and we don't even understand our sense of self. But then when we read these descriptions, we go, oh my gosh, it's like someone actually understands me, and how much value we apply to that. It's pretty hectic.
It is. And let's not discount that when you have this awareness, you do the personality test, you look at it, you resonate with it, and you go, wow. And then you can share that with people that, are close to you. And you can use that to sort of say, okay, I'm aware of these traits of mine, whether it be a personality test, whether it be attachment style. And then when you share it with those people, together you work on it, work on
Yeah.
how to be seen, to be able to sort of go, okay, because especially, and I'll come back to attachment styles. Okay, so you've got an anxious attachment with an avoidant attachment, which generally always come together.
Yeah.
It's from a understanding that you're an anxious attachment. You know that when you have a fight, the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure everything's okay.
Yeah.
Where the avoidant the first thing they need to do is time and space to process. Hello, my first marriage, right? And I didn't even
Yeah.
realize it. I thought they were just being an absolute, they couldn't care less. They just had to dissociate, do whatever. And then because of that, I would get triggered, and then I'd be forcing upon them, well, not even giving them space to be able to process. And so that in itself, had I had that awareness, it actually would have been a good thing.
Yeah.
Not we're making excuses for it, but to be able to bring that awareness into it, I think is highly, highly important. When it
I
comes
agree.
to personality tests, I think they can be useful. I wouldn't go down to the line of it's absolutely essential, but they can be useful when it comes to, especially in the workplace, putting people in positions where you give them the most opportunity to succeed. Now, if you need a personality test to do that, great. If you don't, even better. And you know what? With astrology, I love astrology. And it's just something that it is ever changing. You know, astrology these days has come down to, you know, well, in the past it used to just be one planet, one rising, one whatever. Now it's a whole thing, and planets move and seasons change, and so do I. So, but it's just being able to bring that sort of understanding or using it to help.
Yeah,
And it's
100%. I love the example you gave about attachment styles and avoidant matching with an anxious. I use those terms loosely, but when my husband and I first met, I was very anxiously attached. That was my attachment style, and he was very avoidant attached. And it was like we had this safe distance. And if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see my hands. If you're listening, then just go on the journey with me just from listening. But it's like we had this safe distance. Let's say it was 10 meters was safe. And my impulse, my compulsive action was to move closer to him because I was anxiously attached. I wanted to come closer. And so I would close the gap. I would want to see him more. I would want to hear from him more. I would want to talk to him more. I would want more. But the more I closed the gap, the more he pulled away. And so it was this constant dance of me wanting to come closer and him needing to retreat in order to maintain safety. And so him avoiding me was his self-preservation, and me moving towards him was my self-preservation because of those fears of being abandoned or rejected or whatever it was. And the reason I talk about that is because it was such a real lived experience, healing journey for me to go on. One of the ways that I would be triggered as an anxiously attached person in the past was that if I had romantic interest in someone, so when we were dating and he wouldn't respond to my text messages, I would feel so extremely insecure, massively triggered, massive sense of rejection and hurt and feeling very unsafe and insecure in the relationship. Now, I could have at the time said, I'm anxiously attached and I need you to respond to my messages. Now, that's a fixed mindset. I am anxiously attached, so you need to change your behavior to dance around me because I'm staying here. I am anxiously attached and I'm not changing. So you need to change your behavior to suit my attachment style. Now, the flip side of that was I was already in a massive healing phase of my life there where I was observing my responses. I was observing my behaviors to understand myself more. And I observed myself become very dysregulated when he wouldn't respond to me. And what I then did is I've gone, wow, I can see that I'm very anxiously attached here. And then I did some really deep healing of those rejection wounds, of those abandonment wounds, because those wounds were in me way before he came along. It's just that he then served the purpose of showing me the wounds that were still there when I became anxious when he would disappear. And so that journey of healing and actually deep diving then into understanding, okay, my profile today, my profile is that I am anxiously attached. This is playing out in this way, in this way, in this way, in this way. And then after that, I was able to get to a point where he could respond to a text message or he could not respond to a text message. And both of those things were okay. I was safe and I wasn't triggered into an anxious rejection spiral. And all that meant was to him, he was on work sites where he couldn't have phones. So my trauma was creating a story in my mind and I had friends who were validating this and perpetuating this. If he was into you, he would at least respond to a text. He's just not that into you. Ditch him. If he was interested, then he would be wanting to message you first thing in the morning, that kind of thing, right? And so that potentially could have made me walk away from this relationship. Now, the reality of the situation was that he was really into me. He really liked me. He couldn't take his phone on work sites and he was working 12-hour days. So my need to hear from him quickly was just impossible. He couldn't meet it regardless of how much he liked me. And he was grappling his own wounding of avoidance and fear of when we get too close, he needs to retreat because he felt unsafe. And so it was so profound to me that I was now in a relationship with someone who was willing to also see his patterns of behavior and who was also willing to work with me. And so now I don't have an anxious attachment style. I identify as a securely attached person, right? And so that in my own life, a real life example of we over time, slowly, were able to feel safe being closer and closer together until such a point where I was no longer an anxiously attached person and he was no longer an avoidant attached person. And then we could be together and feel safe in a connected, close, intimate relationship. But that took healing. It took healing of previous wounds and previous trauma that was driving that label of anxious attached or avoidant attached.
And I think even, I'm sorry to jump in, I even think understanding the label at the start also helped in it, because if you didn't have the awareness of this is a
frame of reference,
anxious versus avoidant, then you'd be there going, well, I know I feel this way, but is it right? But you had the clarity to sort of go, actually, anxious, avoidant, that makes sense. In the middle, secure, I want that.
Yeah.
And then how do I get to that? Well, we got to go through this, we got to go through that. Oh, Steve, this, my partner's avoidant, and, so I think in the starting point, the label there, or the awareness with the healing,
with the growth mindset, awareness with a fixed mindset, victim. Awareness with a growth mindset is victor. They are pushing forward. They can actually transcend those barriers. They can transcend the weaknesses. They can grow. They can learn. They can improve. They can become a better version of themselves. And their personality profiling will be different as a result.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And planets move, so clearly things will be affecting them differently.
I love this. In our podcast planning, when I suggested this as a topic, Dave literally wrote a comment going, happy to do this one, but it might be the first one where we disagree, because I'm not into astrology and I'm not into any of that sort of stuff. And I get that there's accuracy in it. I totally, it's validated. I get that. But for me and my frame of reference, it doesn't align. Like I don't read into it. I don't need to go for it for my sense of certainty or security, but I know that that's something that you like.
It definitely seems like to me, if there's not Virgo somewhere prominently in your charts, it'd be very surprising.
I don't even, you might as well be speaking Latin. I literally don't know what you're talking about.
That's all right. Anyone listening who's into astrology and all of that, they would have been giggling their head off, I tell you what.
Oh dear. Anyway, so how do we wrap this up, Dave? Like,
well, I think
what's the take-home message?
The biggest thing for me, the take-home is very simple. The labels and the awareness of what these labels are is a part of the healing process. Part. Repeat one more time. A part. It's really helpful, but that has to be then combined with awareness, with working through what that means for you as a person, not what that means for everyone externally, especially in the first point. It has to be for yourself. And then when you use all of this to heal, to become better, move the needle from being, say, anxious to secure attachment, as an example, this is a healthy way of using those labels to grow forward. A very unhealthy way is, hi, my name's David. I'm anxiously attached, Aries, that has ADHD. Now, you all out there need to respond appropriately.
Yeah.
That's an unhealthy way.
Around me. It's your responsibility to know what makes me tick and what doesn't.
And for me personally, I'm not responsible for my actions, because I've already warned you up front that I am David, Aries, anxious attachment with ADHD. Like, I've absorbed all of my responsibility. That's a very unhealthy way.
And I actually just want to touch on that from a relational perspective. And I'm not just romantic relationship. This is just human relationship in general. That if I know that about someone, if I know that someone is diagnosed with ADHD, for instance, or if I know that someone has a tendency towards anxious attachment, that's data for me. That's something that can inform the way that I relate to them, so that I can relate to them in a way that's sensitive to their challenges and their weak spots. Because I don't wake up in the morning and go, how can I really, really, really press their buttons? But sometimes I'll press people's buttons because I haven't danced in just the right spot. It's like one of those I'm thinking of a game show when I was a kid, and stand on the little things and you'd get a bang when they got it wrong. But when you're in relationship, like I still have wounds and my husband still has wounds. And even though it's not the other person's responsibility to dance around those wounds because we're protecting them, it is a part of relationship. We don't do it because we're obligated to. We do it because we actually love and care for the other person. And so I will have things that I'm still struggling with, and I'll say to him, this is what I need from you. Now, he could say, well, that's your issue. You sort it out. I'm not going to do that just so you feel better. But that's not very loving and empathetic and attentive, right? Now, yes, it is my responsibility, because if I've identified that wound, I can then go and work through it. But while I'm working through it, he can be sensitive to it.
Absolutely.
And I think that's so important in human relationships and in a workplace setting. If you're a leader, the number one trait of leaders now for effective leadership, it's very, very well reported that empathy is the most important leadership quality. And empathy is exactly that. Empathy is about going, well, I can hold you to a standard and accept that you don't have the capacity to meet that standard, but I can be with you while we support you to meet it. And I think that's a really important point to make.
Absolutely. Because yes, when you have this awareness and you bring it to other people, it gives them the opportunity to understand, but it doesn't make them responsible for having to accept everything. I think there's a definite balance. And when you come back to leaders, right? Empathy should have always been number one, because leaders, by definition of its own term, is leading what? Especially in the workplace. I mean, because everything's a people business. And anyone who's in business that doesn't think it's a people business, then I would love to see the next time a car buys another car, because cars don't buy cars.
Yeah, 100%.
Robots
100%.
don't buy things. It's all people and individual relationships. So this has been a pretty cool episode. Hope you guys got some value out of it. And for anyone watching, if you want to drop a comment below to let Ashleigh know what a Virgo traits would be, I'm sure she'd love and read it.
Oh dear.
Anyway,
it's been a great conversation. I'd love to extend the conversation further in another episode about, well, okay, if empathy is important, then how do we nurture that? How do we actually build and grow empathy? And also maybe another one just on fixed versus growth mindsets, because isn't that just so important? It's not just relevant to our profiling stuff, but if we have a fixed mindset on anything in life, then it means that anything that opposes that, or any difference of opinion, is going to feel threatening. It's going to be detected as a threat. And so we'll get defensive, we'll attack, we'll justify. And I think that is also a really, really great topic. I think we could go quite deep into that. So,
well, I mean, there's always next week.
There's always next week, and I love that.
Topic.
So speaking of next week, guys, thanks for tuning in. Make sure you click subscribe, follow, go back and check out the previous episodes. We've gone really deep into some pretty big topics, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ash. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.